if you're feeling confused with nutrition and you're getting overwhelmed with all the information out there, I'm going to cut through all the noise and BS and give you the clarity and tell you exactly what you need to do with nutrition. Whether you're struggling to lose that stubborn fat and you can't seem to drop that bit of body fat to get to the next level of leanness, you're looking to build muscle or both. And more importantly, you want to really improve your metabolic health and live longer, not just live longer, add life to your years. Here's exactly what you need to do. First of all, you think to yourself, right, do I need to go low carbs and eat more carnivore-ish or keto-ish? Or do I add in more carbs? Because I've heard carbs are good and you shouldn't go too low on carbs and blah, blah, blah. Let's start with where most people go wrong. Number one, what you need to focus on before anything else, you need to focus on hitting a protein target. Now, what does that look like? First of all, make sure you're not eating any less than 30 to 50 grams of protein with every single meal you eat, right? If you're having any meals which are really low in protein, in other words, you haven't got any meat or fish, eggs on your plate, or you're not having protein powder with that meal, if you're just having like a smoothie, for example, and you're not at least adding some protein powder in there, or you're even having oats, right? Because oats are quote unquote healthy, and that depends whether they're healthy or not on the individual. And that's what I say to loads of people. They ask me, is this good for you? It depends, because there's so much variance from person to person, which is why it gets confusion with nutrition as well. So, for example, oats, okay, throw in some protein powder. You need to be having at least, I would say, 30 grams of protein with every single meal. Now, if you haven't tracked your protein intake, do it for 7 days. Track your calories just for 7 days so you can see where you're at. In terms of a protein target, the research shows 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So if you're in the US, let's just round it off to a gram per pound of body weight or 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight. So even if you have a bit less than that, have 0.8, it's just easier for maths for 1 gram per pound of body weight. Just keep it really, really simple. But even if you have it a bit less than that, totally fine. As long as with your 3 meals, you're having at least 30 to 50 grams of protein with every single meal. More if you're having 2 meals, right? You need to be hitting a protein target consistently. Most people are not doing that, and they say they're doing that. But when it gets to the weekends, they grossly undereat protein, and then they end up overeating fats and carbs, because that's what happens when you're not hitting it. Why is it so important, firstly, right? Let's get to that before I go off on a massive rant. It's really important because, number one, it's going to blunt appetite, so it's going to stop you overeating. And number two, the research is very clear. If you're not having a minimum of 25% protein, I would say ideally 30% of your calories coming from protein, then you are going to overeat, because naturally the body wants to find homeostasis. And what you'll do is you'll seek out more fats and carbohydrates to make up for the energy you didn't get through protein. And remember, for every 100 calories of protein you eat, only around about let's say 70 calories are going to be actually taken in by the body and stored. The other 30 are actually going to be burnt whilst you're digesting it. So very, very simple. But if you're not doing that, none of this matters, because people always think, do I need to add in vegetables healthy for me? Should I be having white rice? Should I be eating more avocado and adding more fats and olive oil? Like, there's all this confusion out there. Forget about absolutely everything. If you're listening to this now and you don't know how much protein you're eating, if you're struggling to lose fat and you haven't lost any fat, it might not just be that. You could be someone who eats carnivore or keto and you have enough protein, but then perhaps you're not, doing the right training. You're not letting your body recover. Your metabolism has plateaued and your results have plateaued, which is another conversation, which I will touch on. So that's number one. Now, number two, we always look at like fats and stuff, right? And people, when it comes to nutrition, they get confused and they think, right, I want to get into ketosis. I want to get my body to get fat adapted is a common thing that I hear. Now, there's a lot of truth to that. Of course, if you give yourself like 3 to 6 months even eating carnivore, can you get fat adapted? Yes. Does that mean it's going to be optimal? No, not necessarily. So when you're eating, a lot of people, this is very common with keto and carnivore in particular. And again, I'm not shooting anyone down. Whatever's working for you, I'm all for it. But with keto and carnivore, for example, people have lots more fat than what they actually think. Again, fats is just as important as protein to track fats, right? It'll blow your mind even for a week, for 7 days. Get an app like MyFitnessPal app, for example, where you literally just like a table of olive oil, tablespoon of olive oil. It's like 80 calories. People are not even aware. They don't even calculate in their minds, if they haven't tracked most of the time, oils that they use to cook. They just forget about those. And that adds up to thousands more, over 1,000 calories a week in most cases, which makes a big difference to fat loss, for example, right? And health. So essential fats versus bad fats. Not all fats are treated equally, but first and foremost, it's very common for people to overeat fats and calories and be stuck where they're at with weight loss and with the results they want to get. So firstly, what you need to do is make sure you're hitting that protein target that I mentioned. Make sure you're having protein for breakfast as well. That's a big one. Don't skip protein for breakfast because you're always going to end up on the back foot. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to get adequate protein in. The amount that I manage, right, let's say 2 grams per kilo or 1 gram per pound of body weight, if you're not having protein for breakfast in most cases. Now, some people, they can have 2 meals, they can get all the protein in. Most people definitely don't do it. They struggle to get it in over 2 meals. So make sure you're doing that. But then again, going back to the fats, be aware of the fats you're having. If you're having a high fat diet like keto, you're eating like keto-ish, for example, you're adding in plenty of, you're having the fatty meats, which a lot of people have, like the full fat beef, which is a lot of value to that, by the way. They're having the eggs. It's not just the contained fats you get in those foods, might even be ocean fish like salmon. They are then adding in the butters, right? Lots of butter, avocado. It might even be olive oil. It might be a lot of those fats they're adding in, and they end up just plateauing with their fat loss at best, or if not, in some cases, actually gaining fat and being stuck there. So let's get into the nourishment piece of it, right? Not all fats are treated equally, though, because you may hear, you need to have 70% fat to get into keto, for example, or 70 to 85% of your total calories need to be fat for you to go into ketosis generally. And then you think, right, I'm going to eat mainly fat then. But then if you're not tracking it, you haven't got the awareness, you don't know where your maintenance calories are or where your metabolism is at, it's not necessarily going to be a good decision. But when it comes to health, obviously you want to look at the balance of fats. Now, the average person or the American, which is I hate comparing it to the average American, no offense to Americans, but health crisis to say the least, right, when it comes to obesity. But the average person are like 20 to 1 when it comes to the balance of omega-6s to omega-3s. That means they're having like 20 to 1 ratio, right? So let's say they're having like 200 calories from bloody omega-6s, and only 10 calories of that is going to be omega-3s. Right, so the ideal ratio is going to be 4 to 1. And without overcomplicating matters, just avoid vegetable oils and seed oils, right? The pro-inflammatory oils, the soybean, the canola, the rice bran, all those processed seed oils, which are pro-inflammatory, terrible for inflammation. They turn into a trans fat when you cook them, and they're really bad for your health. There's loads of research on that. Now, that being said, I'm going to play devil's advocate there. And I'm going to say that it's not actually as important as what most people who are not in shape. The average person that comes to me, I don't look and go, right, the first thing we're going to do is eliminate seed oils. Right, naturally, I'm going to tell them only to include these oils. Naturally, they're going to eliminate seed oils if they're having them anyway. But, unless you're someone who's obese and someone who has no awareness whatsoever, like most people listening to this podcast, you've already got enough awareness to know that, yeah, I'm not going to have seed oils. I'm going to have ghee oil, I'm going to have beef tallow, and maybe have olive oil as the foods that I use to cook with, or coconut oil. I say ghee oil and beef tallow are the best though. So yeah, obviously avoid those, but you want to be getting in those omega-3s, right? The sardines, the salmon, grass-fed beef, for example, pastured eggs. When it comes to omega-3, I just did a video on this, right? I'd say sardines and salmon are at the top, right? But I would say, well, I definitely would say sardines are not only more nutritious slightly, that's kind of even really, pros and cons to both. The omega-3 slightly more in sardines versus salmon. Iodine is going to be generally a bit higher, I believe, in sardines. Calcium, especially if you're having tins of sardines like most people do, because you're going to get the little bones in there as well. But more, I think equally as important is with salmon, for example, or any predatory fish, they basically, number one, they live longer. Number two, they're predatory fish, so they eat more fish, right? Which then contain more mercury and heavy metals and stuff, right? Whereas sardines is only small fish, so they're going to carry less toxins. But the thing is, most people hate eating sardines. I personally love them, but most people are going to want to enjoy eating like wild Alaskan salmon, for example, right? So I would say all in all, if you enjoy eating sardines are going to be better. And for me, for example, I eat around about 6 tins of sardines a week. And that's covering my omega-3 for sure, right? If you're having a salmon fillet, if you had about even, I would say, 500 to 750 grams of salmon in a week, that's going to cover all your omega-3s, depending on how much you weigh and stuff, of course. About 6 tins of sardines, I calculated about 6 tins of sardines, 6 to 8 tins a week is more than enough omega-3. But also iodine, you only get out of the ocean, right? Pretty much. And iodine's really important for thyroid function, metabolism, lots of different things that happen in the body, right? So very simple, not all fats treated equally. Get the omega-3s in, eat the contained fats and the essential fats that you're going to get grass-fed beef, you're going to get from your eggs, and you're also going to get some from organ meat as well, like beef liver, chicken liver. And like I say, when you cook your food, you add the added fats, right? Not the contained fats that I'm talking about here, contained in those foods. You want to be having your ghee oil, your beef tallow, those kind of things, right? Generally, or even avocado oil is a good one. So not all fats are treated equally, my friend, right? So yeah, so that's that really. That's all you got to look at with fats. Grass-fed beef is a great source of omega-3s when you get good quality grass-fed, grass-finished beef. And not only that, I think there's like 36 different types of saturated fats, if I've got that right. And a lot of these essential, and even myelin as well, which is a type of iron that you get in grass-fed beef, for example, right? But anyway, going back to the fats, you're going to get most of that. I always say to people, right, when it comes to like even people who eat chicken, try and rotate it so you're getting some of the fats that actually satiate you. Forget about all the nourishment and stuff that you're going to get. And again, you do get most of the essential fats that you can get from grass-fed beef and eggs, right? Especially if you're having the whole egg, because that's in the yolk. But it's not going to be ideal, really, if you want to get optimal amounts of omega-3 in, right? There's loads of research on omega-3s for anti-inflammatory for the brain, right? Because obviously we build up all these toxins in the brain, and omega-3 has been proven to really, really help with that, right? So we got to be making sure we're getting enough in. A lot of people take supplements for omega-3s, but I don't. So look, that covers kind of the fat piece. Keep it super, super simple with that. But I always say to rotate your fats as well, right? So look, if you're looking to get leaner, you want to rotate and get some lean cuts of meat. You want to be having some, lean cuts of beef, like whether that's your eye fillet or I think tri-tip is a bit leaner. If I remember rightly, you can see it on the steak, right? When you're having like a rump steak or you're having a Scotch fillet, generally that's going to have more fat in it, but that's going to be where the nutrients are at as well. So, and for example, fish, right? You're going to get omega-3s and lots of healthy fats from sardines and salmon. Sardines are generally going to be more calorie dense, by the way, because they contain a little bit more fat, which you need. But also if you're looking to manage your weight and drop body fat, you still want to be having the lean cuts as well. For example, cod, haddock are examples of super lean fish where it's just pure protein and low in fat, but then you're not going to get the nourishment. So just rotating some of those foods with beef, for example, having extra lean grass-fed beef, like I talked about before, like 5% fat, for example, or the butchers I go to is only 2% fat. Normal beef mince that you buy is generally going to be about 80-20, give or take. So 80% protein, 20% fat. So rotate those things because you do want to be getting, and CLAs as well that you're going to get. Stearic acid is another type of saturated fat, which you're going to get from just full fat beef mince or grass-fed beef, like your ribeyes and stuff. Just rotate those things. But that's why there's so much value, taking all the confusion out of it, of just tracking so you know how much fat is in certain meats and stuff as well, right? So you're aware of that. And then when you add the fats on top of that, you're fully aware. I find a challenge with clients is actually making sure they're not overdoing the fats. Because I've said this before, and we've got to go with the research and from what I've seen in clients and myself. I'm really I more fat than I need, right? I enjoy my dark chocolate. I had my 100% dark chocolate this morning. And I like my full fat meats, right? I have some lean beef mince and stuff, but generally it's all grass-fed beef. But I can get away with way more calories than most people because I've developed my metabolism. I move a lot, right? So be mindful of those things when it comes to the fats. So I'm going to leave the fat stuff, the fats there. Very, very simple. So chicken breast and chicken thigh is another example, right? Chicken breast is going to be lean. Chicken thigh is going to have a bit more fat. But that extra fat, not only is it going to give you not so much in chicken thighs, more so in grass-fed beef and ocean fish and stuff, but it's going to keep you more satiated, right? Because fat is the second most satiating macronutrient next to protein. So chicken thighs actually taste better as well, right? So these are things you got to take into account, like what can you adhere to as well. Personally, I much prefer the taste of chicken thighs. I'm going to have some today, actually. I haven't had them for a while. I was having chicken breasts. They get a little bit boring, right? So look, whatever feels kind of easier, you got to enjoy your meals, right? Which is overlooked in this nutrition space. And that's why people get confused, because they split hairs with, do I eat this, do I eat that? When the reality is, they're always on or off with diet. I'm going to follow this new diet, and then you're going to go back to old behaviors most of the time, because diets generally work until they don't work. It's not a long-term approach for most people. Generally, if you feel like you're on a diet, most people have already lost. Now, if I'm speaking to you and you're following carnivore or keto and it's working for you and you're absolutely bang on and you've been that way for years, well done. You're in the minority of people, right? I'm speaking to the masses here. You got to look at what can I adhere to, and that's what I always look at with clients. Like, I can give them the best bloody advice on nutrition, the ultimate meal plan and structure and training program. But if they can't stick to it based on how much time they have available with their lifestyle, how many hours they work, the psychological element behind food as well, in terms of what have they struggled with in the past. Like, I used to struggle with binge eating, and it was a real battle. So I can relate to a lot of my clients, and a lot of them who come to me, depending on the person, you know, they might be carrying more body fat than they want to be, and they want to drop fat, they want to get metabolically healthy, and they want to really not be on or off with diet. And most people are on or off. It's the all or nothing mentality. They get to the weekends and they come undone, right? And a lot of the times that's because, number one, they're not getting the nourishment that they need. A lot of the times you'd be surprised as well when it comes to the confusion. Nutrient deficiencies is a real thing, right? Lots of people, I'm going to get to this, they have nutrient deficiencies. A lot of the times, not all the time, a lot of the times when people want, let me use chocolate, for example, right? They might be getting the consistent craving for chocolate. Now, a lot of the times that's going to be emotional. There might be chocolate in the house because they've got kids and they store it in the house. It might go back to childhood stuff or whatever. We can get really complex with this, but sometimes it can simply be a nutrient deficiency. For example, magnesium. People are constantly getting that craving for chocolate. Maybe that could be a magnesium deficiency. Let's look into that, right? And then if we can convert that into maybe dark chocolate, for example. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say, most of the time, I'm not going to advise people to eat more dark chocolate to get magnesium. I prefer people eat, for example, grass-fed beef, even some organ meats. Green leafy vegetables is a really good source of magnesium, for example, and even just greens in general. Also, even potatoes and root vegetables as well, because they're lower in calories, right? And they get the fiber hit as well. Then this depends on the person, depends on what they can metabolize and digest as well. But you've really got to look into that. Nutrient deficiencies are a real thing. And I pick up on this with clients. And that's, it can be overwhelming if you're trying to think of all these things. But I'll tell you what, on that note anyway, I've broken this down. I believe I've broken this down in my my Shred Blueprint. But either way, I'm going to add in the Shred Blueprint into the show notes anyway. And this is what I do for people when I do a challenge, and it helps people shred fat within 3 weeks. Like, people have lost like 5 to 10 pounds of fat and kept it off. It's got everything you need in there when it comes to nutrition, losing fat, everything you need basically to drop fat and keep it off. But also I'm going to add what's even more important on nutrition to cut through all the confusion and overwhelm and give you clarity with a shopping list on what to eat. And everything. I'm going to also add my nutrition fundamentals program, guide in the show notes as well. So Shred Blueprint, nutrition guide. And also, whilst I'm on that point as well, I'm basically doing a mid-year reset session. It's a webinar. And if you're struggling, if you said at the start of the year, I'm going to get in shape, you're still not there, you're frustrated, you're stuck, and you want to finish this year on top form, this webinar is going to be absolute gold. It's going to be a handful of clients there. I'm opening up some spaces to the public. I'm giving you exactly what you need and because a lot of my clients are busy, they travel with work, and I'm giving you the blueprint on what you need to do. Exactly what you need to do to manage all those things, manage your busy lifestyle, travel, vacations, how to audit your health as well. I'm giving you a tracker for that. It's going to be gold. So I've left that link in the show notes as well. Just click it and reserve your seat. So moving on then, right? So carbs. Let's get into carbs. We've touched on protein, fats. Let's get into carbs now and just get rid of all this overwhelm. What I like to think for most people, now for everyone, now I'm talking to the masses, everyone's different. But when it comes to carbs, I like the concept of earning your carbohydrates, right? So I do this not more so because it's nothing to do with like fat gain or body composition. For me, it just works for me because I find I'm a bit more productive if I just detach from carbohydrates in the daytime. Other than dark chocolate, 100%. That's 0 carbs, by the way. The 100% dark chocolate I'm having. I had that this morning with my black coffee, for example. Lunchtime, like I said before, I'll have my meats, Today I've got chicken thighs, but that's only like 10% of the time. I normally just eat beef and beef liver, sometimes some chicken liver. So anyway, I'll have today, for example, let's not use the day. Normally I'll have like beef. Every other day I'll have eggs and then some avocado cooked in ghee oil, dark chocolate as well with my coffee, or just after that meal at lunchtime. I fast in the mornings. Don't recommend that to most people, but I'm used to this and it works for me, although I probably would do better having 3 meals a day. That's another conversation. I'll do that, and then in the evening I'll backload my carbohydrates and replenish, because I train first thing in the morning. And I do that because it helps me, well, basically, I know I thrive and I do better when I have more carbs. Number one, it replenishes my glycogen levels from my workout earlier in the daytime. And number two, it loads me up for the session the next day because I train in the morning. Remember, people always say, do I need to eat carbohydrates before training? Again, it depends. What I find is, particularly females, they tend to do better, or especially people who are lean, people who are really lean, or generally just leaner than most. They tend to do better having some simple carbohydrates before training because it's straight in the system, it's available energy to use. And when it comes to lifting heavy and high intensity, the research is clear. Generally, you're going to get more out of your workout in terms of strength and even recovery when you have some carbohydrates before, or in my case, the night before, right? So I'll have my white rice as my main carb source and fruit. And that's it, really. I'll have that this evening with my meal, of course, with my meat and stuff and maybe some greens. I got some green beans tonight, I think, and some spinach, which I've been having. I don't have a great deal of greens, but I do that mainly to keep me satiated. It's less about magnesium and the vitamins, although I do think about that. But it's mainly the fiber and the fact that they just, they probably balance out my blood sugar levels a bit more because they're a non-starchy carbohydrate, and I feel more satiated when I do that. And I enjoy them. I actually enjoy eating greens. So it's context dependent, right, in terms of earning your carbohydrates. A lot of people do better just eating carbohydrates, all throughout the day in small doses. So I like that concept, though, of, earning your carbs in terms of training, replenish, because it aids recovery. So go to the gym, have a big carb hit afterwards, whether that be your white rice, your potatoes, your fruits. Obviously, make sure you're getting your protein in as well. And I think it's just a good mindset to have for most. Now, a lot of people, like I say, they're going to do well having carbs before as well. So what kind of people generally, if I'm speaking to the masses, need to eat more carbohydrates or need to have I'd say, higher than a low carb diet? So a low carb diet, if we just measure that in under 100 grams of carbohydrates a day, what does that look like, right? If you've never tracked your carbs. So if you're having 100 grams of carbohydrates, what does that look like? That would look like, for example, for me, I'm probably averaging, I would guess, around about 150 grams of carbohydrates. So if we look at like white rice, for example, if we had, like a tiny bowl, to put it in a simple way, or just say a palm size amount of white rice on your plate with one meal, and then you had like, let's just say a bowl of fruit, for example, that's going to be easily 100 grams of carbohydrates, maybe a little bit more even, right? That's going to be 100 grams of carbs done, right? But a lot of people, and I would argue most people generally will do better. And I would like to say as well, like for a woman, if you're under even 30%, if I put body fat, and for a man who's under, say, let's just go under 20% body fat, generally you're going to do better. You're going to be a bit more insulin sensitive, because remember, when you've got less body fat, your body then is not gonna, it's going to store a lot of the insulin, right, in, the cells, the muscle cells, the liver cells, and it's not going to spill over into fat. When you've got more fat on your body, the insulin is easily going to spill over into your fat cells, and you're going to gain more fat, is the way I like to put it. But let's look at muscle as well, right? Look at muscle being the longevity organ. It's like a metabolic sink, right? So you can get away with way more carbohydrates if you've got more muscle on your body, because you've got like a bigger sink to fill up, is the best way to put it, right? With having more muscle on your body. So if you're lean, like if we use me, for example, if I did my body fat, it depends on how I do it. But if I did it with the traditional way with calipers, I'm probably under 15% right now. I know a lot of people would say I'm less than that. I don't know, let's just say I'm like 12 or 13%, although I look less than that to a lot of people. I've got a lot of muscle mass on my body. I could eat 250 grams of carbohydrates, a day, 200 grams to 250 grams, even 300 grams, still be lean, feel great. I probably would feel better, to be honest. And that's what I'd like to say, right? If I brought my fats down, I struggle to do that because I enjoy eating fats. And I find a lot of us do enjoy eating fattier foods, right? And even added fats that we like to add in, right? Even if it's like nuts or nut butters or, you know, even if it's avocados or if it's Greek yogurt, for example. I love my Greek yogurt. I love eating those foods. If I was more mindful and I cut them down and had more carbs, I would probably feel better. And in fact, I probably need to do this because I know how I am. I know I'm metabolically really healthy and I know it would do me good, but I enjoy eating those foods too much. And again, it's for me, it's performance as well. Like if I'm eating more carbs and less fats, generally, you know, I would spend more time eating. I would like to have that over 3 meals, and it's just not convenient for me, right? So anyway, long story short, that's just to give you some context on where I'm at and the kind of people that do well with carbs. Now, the majority of people I coach, regardless of leanness and everything else, they do better with some carbs in the diet. Number one, going back to what I said, because of adherence. You know, a lot of people, there's very few people that are eating extremely low carbohydrates, right? And, you know, really never struggle with their food before, like the end. So when they come to me, you know, I'm not going to restrict carbs. It's not something I'm going to look at. And this is just another thing on that as well, is the mindset around food, which is overlooked in the nutrition space. And we have all this information, but I did a whole workshop on this, and you know, I'm happy to send this over to you anyway, called the Empowered Eating Blueprint. And look, long story short, I struggled myself, and I didn't know this consciously at the time with food when I was struggling with food in terms of like overeating on the weekends, that I was overly restrictive in the week, and I was actually restricting carbohydrates as well as fats, essential fats, which I think was having a bigger negative impact. Actually, was having 2 lean cuts of protein. Being too extreme. That was back in the bodybuilding days, right? Years ago, over a decade ago. And as a result of that, I was feeling psychologically deprived or restricted when I got to the weekend. But also on a nutritional level, I likely wasn't getting enough fats to support hormone function, keep me satiated, and fuel me, right? So it was probably a physiological thing as well in terms of not getting optimal amounts of fats, or at least the right balance of fats, which are making me want to eat more on the weekends. And that happens with a lot of people. They struggle to adhere to what they're doing. So if I was just to strip all carbs away, it's the psychological impact of taking away foods and restricting, which is something that most people have struggled with their whole lives, right? Is eating too much, essentially, right? In you know, if we simplify it. So we want to look at that, and that's what I look at with clients. I'm not going to just take away all your carbohydrates. I'm going to have a look at where you're at, and I'm going to firstly have you focus on eating optimal protein, and then I'm going to fine tune your carbs and fats based on where you're at. And look, if you have tracked macros and calories and everything else, the research shows that having any more than about, you know, and this is very context dependent again, having any more than about, you know, 30% of your total calories coming from fat, which by the way, I do, right? Because I enjoy eating those fats. There's generally not going to be a great deal of benefit. Whereas there is benefit for most having carbohydrates, a good amount of carbohydrates to support, to fuel their body for training, and for especially people who train a lot, right, and lift weights and stuff, to fuel their body for recovery, for strength in the gym, even for sleep as well. Again, generally you're going to get more of a secretion of serotonin when you're having more carbohydrates, and having lower carbohydrates generally is more kind of dopamine fueled, right? Just to kind of simplify things. So when you look at the pathway of dopamine and, you know, cortisol and norepinephrine, it's a similar pathway, long story short, like the cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline, they're the stress hormones, right? Which can give you like energy and the drive to do things. But ultimately carbohydrates are going to generally increase serotonin levels and have more of a calming effect as well. And there's loads of research on thyroid function as well, right? People who go extremely low with carbohydrates, it can have a negative impact over time on thyroid function, on hormone profile, definitely testosterone levels in men. To be honest, I'd like to get my free testosterone levels up a bit higher, and I probably should increase carbohydrates and perhaps throw in an extra meal in the mornings to reduce my cortisol levels and fuel my body more as well, right? So look, I'm aware, I'm always looking to level up myself. So that's a simple way. And look, not all carbs are treated equally. You know, refined sugars, avoid them like the plague, avoid the ultra processed foods, things that come out of a packet, right? Remember, they're just never going to be ideal. And if they've got ingredients you can't pronounce, look, the best way to put this is 90% of your plates or 90% of the food you eat needs to be single ingredient foods. I don't buy into 80%. You can get in decent shape and you can be at a decent level with your relationship with food, but you're never going to get to that black belt level unless you're having at least 90% single ingredient foods and whole foods. And then the other 10%, 10%, if you're having some UPF, ultra processed foods, or foods which are not ideal, not going to have as big an impact if you're having whole foods and you're having a protein, you're hitting a protein target consistently, right? I can't stress those are the big rocks. And when it comes to micronutrients as well, like again, do I need to eat vegetables, fruit? What supplements should I take? I'm going to get to the supplements as well. Look at the micronutrient powerhouses, right? Which you are going to get from organ meats like liver, right? So I always recommend, I know people don't like it. If you don't like eating beef liver, then maybe get a supplement. My man Stu, I'm not affiliated with him, but he's a friend of mine, and I know his supplements are top drawer, top notch. Ancestral Nutrition, they do like organ meats, capsule form. You want to be getting those in. That's going to be the ultimate multivitamin, basically, is beef organs. Vitamin A, B12, iron, zinc, even choline and beef liver as well. Best source of choline, really important for brain function and cognitive function and brain health. Also, egg yolks as well. A good source of choline, but yeah, they're really good micronutrient sources. And then obviously grass-fed beef as well. You're going to get a specific heme iron, B vitamins, zinc, those kind of things. Avocados are a great source of micronutrients like potassium, vitamin E, magnesium. And that's what I mentioned earlier, when you look at fruit and veg, prioritizing colorful fruit and veg, like for vitamin C, potassium, magnesium, and, antioxidants and stuff, particularly berries. Berries are a powerhouse in polyphenols, right? It's in my top 5 foods, especially blueberries in terms of, polyphenols like antioxidants for gut and brain health, vitamin C, but also, I just took on a new client. I'm not going to mention her name. She's probably listening to this, right? But one of the first ports of call, one of the first things I said to her, I saw she was eating some berries. I was like, right, I saw you were having like half a cup to a 3/4 of a cup of berries a day. Let's ramp that up to 1 cup a day. That's going to give her like 4 or 5 grams of fiber, give or take as well, which does keep you more satiated on top of the protein. But more important than that is the nourishment you're going to get from berries as well. So that's definitely a superfood. And the great thing with berries as a fruit is they're low in calories as well if you're looking to lose weight. And also they are high in fiber and low in sugar, unlike most other fruits. But the dark leafy greens as well, like I mentioned about, spinach earlier, folate, magnesium, vitamin K. And by the way, you get vitamin K as well from beef liver. As long as you cook them properly, they are health foods. So eating fruit and vegetables, if I just simplify this for everyone, right? If 90% of the food you're eating, like if you can just mainly eat meat, fish, eggs, fruits, vegetables, cook the vegetables, don't eat them raw for digestion and just health to get rid of the defense chemicals and some of the toxins that you get in them, you cannot go wrong, honestly. And definitely if you're hitting the protein target on top of that towards the top end, like I say, 1 gram per pound of body weight, you cannot go wrong if 90% of the time you're doing that. So cut all the noise out and just do that, right? It's very, very simple. I want to give you some bonus tips here as well, just to kind of wrap this up. So incomplete foods versus complete foods, stop snacking, eat 3 set meals. Right? Or if you're someone who's used to like fasting and having less frequent meals and that's really working for you and you're not struggling with fat loss, you're not overeating on weekends and everything's going really good doing that, which is not for most people, by the way, when it comes to fasting. They say they eat once or twice a day, but then they slip on the weekends all the time, right? And they go backwards. It's not about being perfect. Then make sure you are having no snacks, right? Cut the snacks out. Have your 3 meals, complete meals, like I just mentioned, 30 grams of protein minimum with each meal. Snacking is just incomplete meals. It's emotional. 90% of the time you don't need to snack. You just want it because you're bored or you're not having enough water. So you're mistaking hunger for thirst and you're reaching for the snacks. It just eliminates snacking, right? You just eliminate it unless you're on the move and it's an exception or whatever, right? Just eat properly. Eat complete meals and avoid incomplete meals. Hydration versus hunger, right? This is a big thing. Like I said, most people mistake hunger for thirst. Getting the water into the cells is the key though. So in the morning, I've gone back from electrolytes to having lemon and salt, right? Half a lemon, squeeze half a lemon, put like 1/4 teaspoon of salt, glass of water, mix it together, drink that. Perfect, because the lemon's got magnesium and potassium in it. It's good for get the digestive system flowing as well, or waking it up with the salt. and the lemon together and the water is going to help you really hydrate, right? So if you're just having water in the morning, add that. Do that straight away. Game changer. It's going to help you hydrate faster. It's going to boost your energy. And that's a real important thing, especially if you're eating mainly whole foods. People who eat UPF, loads of UPF, they have more sodium, right? Not the right type. They're not getting they're having refined sodium, but they're still getting enough sodium. People who eat whole foods struggle to get enough in most of the time. So make sure you add in salt with that water in the morning and staying hydrated. Like I said, fiber. A good target if you do track your food is having 10 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories minimum, right? Providing you don't get any digestive issues, right? You've got to be aware of that. If you're having loads of fiber, that can be an issue for some. And get that through foods like berries, right? Have a cup of berries every single day, and then your leafy greens and your greens and stuff, right? And even your starchy carbohydrates like your sweet or white potatoes. Again, a lot of people, they get digestive issues with that. Most people do better with white rice, although that's not a good source of fiber for digestion and starchy carbs. But potatoes are amazing. Potassium, they got other nutrients as well. What is it? Great source of potassium, even vitamin A as well in sweet potatoes. And obviously you're going to get fiber as well. I believe a bit of magnesium. So it is a bit of a powerhouse when it comes to micronutrients, especially sweet potato or Yukon Gold potatoes. So yeah, I would really, really definitely focus on that. And then, just avoid ultra-processed foods like the plague. You can't go wrong. Plan ahead. Like, this is some tips on let's just wrap this up on my highest performing clients. The ones who really get to the next level, right? Most consistent clients, they don't eat necessarily to restrict all of these bad foods. Like, people always label things good, bad. I can't eat this. I've got to stay away from that because it's really bad for me. And it's like, it's good to be aware. You got to be realistic. Yeah, that food's not ideal for my health. It's not nourishing me. I'm adding chemicals to my body, which I don't need. But it's not about being perfect. It's about eating to build, eating to perform. I eat to perform, or I eat to build. My clients, they eat to get stronger, to build muscle, to speed metabolism up. Naturally, they turn their body into a fat burner machine from doing that, right? They seek out foods for health, for training, for recovery, like I say, rather than, restricting and constantly, trying to rely on willpower. And I can't eat these foods. These foods are forbidden. Good luck doing that, right? The body doesn't work, the brain doesn't work well like that at all, right? If you say don't do something, or you say don't think of a pink elephant, you're going to think of a pink elephant. You're thinking of one right now, right? Don't think of a pink elephant. Guarantee a pink elephant just popped into your mind. It did for me. So bear in mind the psychology around food. People overlook that, right? So yeah, they use food to really drive results, right? High protein, nutrient dense foods, support muscle and satiety, right? Protein, fiber, essential fats that you get, all the stuff I mentioned. And yeah, just single ingredient foods primarily, right? Simple as that. 90% single ingredient foods. That's how you define whole foods, if I keep it simple. And they're not perfect. I think this is a big thing as well where people overlook. Like, my successful clients who get long-term results, they get in great shape. They're okay with not being perfect. They actually give themselves permission, and I do this as well, permission to slip up from time to time, right? But they're structured and they're self-aware, and they have a support system with me and with our community, but also at home, right? If you haven't got a support system at home, or at least, you're surrounded, not even necessarily at home, but if you're not surrounding yourself with people who support your goals, it's not always going to be like that. But at least for the most part, then it makes it a lot harder, right? So, and the research is clear on this, and I see this with clients. If you don't plan ahead, you are going to be screwed. Like, if you travel or something with work, right? A lot of my clients, they're real high performers and they're successful in their careers and they travel a lot. And they go on vacations, they enjoy themselves, right? But when it comes to traveling with work, we plan ahead. We go, okay, when's this? Great. Okay, so what do we need to do? Fantastic. Let's get your trainers, right, in the gym bag and your gym kit straight away. Let's have a look at the gyms nearby your hotel where you're staying, and let's get a few sessions in if you're there for longer than a few days. If you can't get to the gym, or there's not one in the hotel, which is not normally the case, right? Great, we're just going to do the bands. And sometimes they like, in the 10% of cases where they haven't physically got the time because they're back-to-back meetings literally for the whole time, then they fly back home. Just take the resistance bands, let's commit to 10, 15 minutes, right? Like, just doing something and getting into the habit of being consistent regardless, right? Because on or off and lack of consistency is the biggest killer of progress, right? So, and it's not about restriction as well. It's about learning to think. It's about identity, right? For example, A lot of my clients look up to me. A lot of people in my audience, you know, I guess they find me inspiring or whatever, right? Which sounds a bit weird coming out of my mouth. This is just the feedback I've had from people, right? Because I can stay in shape, not just physically, right? This is the byproduct. Mentally, physically, I perform well. You know, I fuel my body. My bloods, I had my bloods done recently. They were great. I am living and breathing health, literally. Like I can't, I'm in that 1% of people. I live and breathe this shit, right? Like for everything from sleep tools, trackers, and bloody this thing I paid for, which goes like, I could go down the list of things, the water filter, the micro, like I'm all over it, right? I'm all over it like a bad rash. But really you have to identify as a healthy person, right? So for example, what would a healthy person do when they go away on work, or they go on a trip on holiday or whatever? What would they do? What would a healthy person do? They would definitely take their gym kit. They would definitely be training, right? It doesn't mean you hit the off button just because you go away on holiday. Still train, right? There's nothing, you can't just go on or off. The odd week here and there, cool. But a healthy person trains. That's what they do, right? They're healthy and they like to be strong and they like to be fit. So they train regardless of where they go. That's just who they are. Like with me, it's just like, it's like brushing my teeth. It's just what you do. So you just got to think like someone who would be healthy. What would they do with their food when they go away? Well, they would plan ahead, right? They'd look at the restaurant, look at the menu in advance. If you're eating out, you're on client meetings or whatever, you're going on holiday, yeah, enjoy yourself, eat some of your favorite foods here and there. I'm not talking about being overly restrictive or perfect, but look at the menu in advance, going back to protein. Okay, great, they got steak on the menu. I can have the steak. And you know what? If I decide to have something after that, all right, cool, I might do that. But if you have the protein and fiber on top of that, if you can, have a look, see if they got salad or vegetables there as well on the menu. You just have less desire to eat the desserts and you have less desire to eat other foods. And like, that's why I always say, don't start on the bread. Don't start on those simple carbs before you've had the protein and ideally protein, meat, and fiber on top of that. So it's planning ahead, right? And just, it's simple stuff, but people they don't prioritize it. That's all it comes down to, ladies and gents, right? So let's cut all the BS. That's everything you need to know. Oh, by the way, none of this information matters if you don't know your body's ability to either drop fat or build muscle or both. I am going to give you a free metabolic assessment. It gives you a metabolic score, which tells you exactly what you need to do with food, training, lifestyle, mapped out for you for your specific metabolic type, body, and metabolic score. So if you want a free metabolic assessment, just click the link beneath. I put it beneath and I've labeled all these links, right? There's about 50 of them in there now. But look, grab them. They're free resources for now. Don't know if they'll be free forever. All right. Speak soon.